A millionaire walks into a diner with his silent, wheelchair-bound daughter, hoping for a quiet meal. James Thompson, a wealthy but broken man, has given up on reaching 6-year-old Emma, who hasn't smiled since her mother's death. But then, Sarah Miller, a young waitress with tired eyes and a warm heart, does the impossible. She talks to Emma, and the little girl smiles for the first time in years. While snobby customers mock Sarah's lowly job, James sees something extraordinary: hope. Stunned, he wonders who this woman is and why she's hiding her gift. As Sarah's past unravels, she pulls James and Emma into a journey of healing, love, and heartbreak. But when faced with a choice, will Sarah stay to become part of their family, or walk away to change the world? Stick around to find out in this soul-stirring story of second chances. James Thompson pushed open the door of the corner kitchen, the soft jingle of the bell barely registering as he guided his daughter Emma's wheelchair inside. The Asheville diner buzzed with the hum of conversation and the clink of dishes, but James's world felt silent. Emma, 6 years old and bound by cerebral palsy, stared blankly at her lap, her small hands still, her face expressionless. Since his wife's death, James had poured his energy into his real estate empire, but no amount of wealth could bridge the gap between him and his daughter. He felt like a failure every time he looked at her, her silence, a wall he couldn't climb. "Table for two?" The hostess's voice snapped him out of his thoughts. She was young, her smile polite but strained, likely from a long shift. "Somewhere quiet," James said, his tone clipped but not unkind. He adjusted Emma's blanket, tucking it around her small frame as the hostess led them to a booth near the back. The diner wasn't his usual scene, no polished silverware or sommeliers here, but it was close to home, and he wasn't in the mood for the city's upscale spots. Tonight, he just needed to get through dinner without feeling like he was letting Emma down again. As James settled into the booth, he glanced at the menu, more out of habit than interest. His focus stayed on Emma, her head tilted slightly, her fingers unmoving. "You hungry, sweetheart?" he asked softly, already knowing she wouldn't answer. She hadn't spoken or reacted to much since her mother passed, and every meal was a battle. He sighed, rubbing his temple, the weight of helplessness pressing against his chest. A shadow fell across the table, and James looked up to see a waitress standing there, a small notepad in hand. "Hi, I'm Sarah," she said, her voice warm despite the faint shadows under her hazel eyes. She was young, mid-20s maybe, with a smudge of flour on her sleeve and a quiet confidence that didn't match the exhaustion James usually saw in service workers. "What can I get started for you?" James cleared his throat, caught off guard by her directness. "Grilled chicken for me. For her." He glanced at Emma, hesitating. "Something soft, maybe soup?" Sarah's gaze shifted to Emma, and her brow furrowed slightly, not with pity but with something else, understanding maybe. "Is chicken noodle okay? It's homemade, easy to eat." James nodded, surprised by the care in her tone. "That's fine." "Great, I'll be right back." Sarah flashed a small smile before turning away, her sneakers squeaking faintly on the linoleum floor. James reached for his phone, scrolling through emails to distract himself, but his mind was on Emma. Would she eat tonight, or would she push the spoon away like always? He hated this routine, the endless cycle of trying and failing to reach her. He'd hired specialists, therapists, the best money could buy, but none had broken through. What was he doing wrong? Minutes later, Sarah returned, setting a steaming bowl of soup in front of Emma and a plate of grilled chicken before James. "Let me know if you need anything," she said, her voice light, then stepped back to tend another table. James grabbed the spoon, his movements mechanical. "All right, Emma, let's try," he murmured, scooping a bit of broth and bringing it to her lips. Before it got close, Emma's hand jerked up, knocking the spoon away. It clattered against the bowl, broth splattering the tablecloth. A few nearby customers glanced over, their stares prickling James's skin. He clenched his jaw, not angry at Emma but at himself. He reached for the spoon again, softer this time. "Please, sweetheart." Emma didn't move, her fingers gripping the hem of her dress, her eyes fixed somewhere he couldn't follow. James exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair, fighting the frustration bubbling inside. He was so focused on keeping his composure that he almost missed the voice beside him. "May I try?" Sarah was back, kneeling beside Emma's wheelchair, her expression calm but certain. James frowned, his first instinct to say no. Emma wasn't a project, and he didn't need pity from a stranger. But something in Sarah's eyes, gentle, unwavering, made him pause. She wasn't looking at him like he was a failing father, or at Emma like she was broken. She was just there. "What?" James asked, his voice sharper than he meant. Sarah nodded toward the spoon. "May I try feeding her?" James hesitated. He'd spent a fortune on experts who'd failed to connect with Emma. Why would a waitress be any different? But then he thought of Emma's silence, the wall between them, and the ache in his chest that never went away. Wordlessly, he handed Sarah the spoon. Sarah shifted to Emma's eye level, her movements slow and deliberate. Instead of lifting the spoon right away, she spoke, her voice soft but clear. "Hey, Emma. I'm Sarah. You know, when I was a kid, my little sister loved soup. She said it was like a warm hug in a bowl. She dipped the spoon into the broth, holding it up, but not pushing. Want to try a tiny hug?" James watched, his breath caught in his throat. Emma didn't respond, but Sarah didn't waver. She kept talking, her tone light, like she was chatting with an old friend. "Just one little sip, okay?" Slowly, she brought the spoon to Emma's lips. This time, Emma didn't pull away. The broth touched her mouth, and after a moment, she swallowed. James stared, his heart pounding. It was just a sip, but for Emma, who fought every bite, it was a miracle. Then, something even more impossible happened. Emma's lips curved just slightly into a smile, a real smile, the first since her mother died. James felt the world shift, the diner's noise fading until it was just him, Emma, and this stranger, who'd done what no one else could. Sarah looked up at him, her eyes warm but guarded. "She's listening," she said simply, as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. James's voice came out hoarse. "How did you do that?" Sarah shrugged, handing back the spoon. "I just talked to her." She stood, brushing off her apron, and walked away to another table. Across the room, a group of well-dressed customers snickered, their voices carrying. "Look at her, thinking she's some hero," one said, gesturing at Sarah. "Just another waitress pretending she's more than she is." The words stung, and James felt a pang of shame. He thought the same about people like Sarah, people who worked jobs he'd never had to. But now, watching Emma's faint smile linger, he realized he'd been wrong. Sarah wasn't just a waitress, she was something else entirely, and he needed to know what. That night, James couldn't sleep. Emma's smile haunted him, a fleeting glimpse of the daughter he'd lost to silence. He sat in his study, the glow of his laptop casting shadows across the room, replaying Sarah's voice, her gentle words to Emma. It wasn't just what she'd done. It was how she'd done it. Like she saw Emma, really saw her in a way no one else had. Not the therapists, not the specialists, not even him. Who was this woman, and why was she working as a waitress when she could do that? By morning, James made a call. "Find out everything you can about Sarah Miller," he told his assistant, his voice low but firm, discreetly. He wasn't used to being this impulsive, but Emma's smile was a crack in the wall he'd built around his heart, and he couldn't let it go. The report came quickly, as it always did when money was no object. Sarah Miller, 26, had been a star student at UNC Asheville, majoring in special education. Her professors called her brilliant, compassionate, and natural with children like Emma. But then, tragedy struck. Her younger sister, Sophie, also diagnosed with cerebral palsy, died unexpectedly. Sarah dropped out soon after, vanishing from academia. No diploma, no explanation, just a trail of unpaid medical bills and a job at the corner kitchen. James stared at the screen, his chest tightening. Sarah hadn't just studied kids like Emma, she'd lived it, loved it, and lost it. He returned to the diner the next evening, the place quieter now, the dinner rush fading. Sarah was clearing a table, her sleeves rolled up, a faint smudge of ketchup on her apron. She moved with purpose, but James could see the weight in her shoulders, the kind of exhaustion that wasn't just physical. When she noticed him, her eyes widened, then narrowed. "Mr. Thompson," she said, wiping her hands. "Back so soon?" "We need to talk," James said, his tone steady but urgent. He wasn't here for pleasantries. Sarah glanced around, then sighed. "I'm working, can it wait?" "It won't take long." His voice softened, but he didn't back down. She hesitated, then nodded, leading him to a corner near the service station, away from curious eyes. The hum of the diner faded as James faced her. "You were incredible with Emma last night," he said, cutting to the chase. "I've never seen her respond like that, not to anyone." Sarah blinked, clearly unprepared for the praise. "I just talked to her," she said, shrugging, but her voice wavered, like she was guarding something. James studied her, searching for the woman behind the apron. "I looked into you," he said, and her posture stiffened. "You were top of your class at UNC Asheville, special education. You were meant for this, Sarah. Why are you here wiping tables?" Her lips pressed into a thin line, and for a moment he thought she'd walk away. "That's none of your business," she said quietly, her hazel eyes flashing with defiance. "It is if you're the only person who's ever made my daughter smile." James leaned closer, his voice low but intense. "Come work for me. Be Emma's caregiver. She needs you." Sarah's breath hitched, and she looked away, her hands clenching the edge of her apron. "You don't know what you're asking," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Then tell me." James's tone softened, sensing the pain behind her words. "Why did you walk away?" Silence stretched between them, heavy and raw. Sarah's throat worked, like she was swallowing back something she'd buried deep. Finally she spoke, her voice trembling. "My sister, Sophie. She was like Emma. I spent my whole life learning how to help her, promising I'd always be there. I studied special education to make a difference, not just for her, but for kids like her." She paused, her eyes glistening. "But I couldn't save her. She got sick and I didn't know how to fix it. She died and I failed her." James's heart clenched. He knew that kind of guilt, the kind that gnawed at you in the quiet hours. "I'm sorry," he said, meaning it. Sarah shook her head, wiping at her eyes. "After she died, I couldn't go back. I couldn't face those classrooms, those books, knowing I'd let her down. So I left. I work here, pay off her medical bills, and keep my head down. That's my life now." James frowned, the pieces clicking into place. "You're drowning in debt for a kid who's gone working nights in a diner where people look down on you. I heard those customers last night, Sarah. They called you lowly. You're better than this." Sarah let out a bitter laugh, but there was no humor in it. "Better? You think I haven't heard that before? People like you, with your fancy cars and big houses, you don't get it. I'm not here because I want to be. I'm here because I have to be. Those bills don't pay themselves, and no one else is stepping up." Her words hit like a punch, and James felt the sting of his own privilege. He'd built an empire, but he'd never had to scrape by, never had to face the world's judgment for a job society deemed lesser. "I'm not like them," he said, his voice quieter now. "I see you, Sarah, and I see what you did for Emma. She trusts you. She smiled because of you. Please, just consider it." Sarah crossed her arms, her expression unreadable. "You think throwing money at me will fix everything? I can't be what you want. I can't risk failing another kid like I failed Sophie." "You didn't fail her," James said, his voice firm. "You loved her. And Emma, she's not Sophie. She's a chance to do what you were meant to do." Sarah's eyes met his, and for a moment he saw the battle raging inside her, hope warring with fear. Then she shook her head. "I'm sorry, Mr. Thompson, I can't." She turned, walking back to her tables, her shoulders hunched like she was carrying the weight of the world. James watched her go, his jaw tight. He wasn't used to hearing no, but this wasn't about his ego. It was about Emma, about the spark he'd seen in her eyes for the first time in years. And it was about Sarah, a woman who'd lost everything but still had the power to give his daughter hope. He didn't know why she was running from her past, but he knew one thing. He wasn't giving up. Not on Emma, and not on her. Sarah stood in the doorway of James Thompson's home in Biltmore Village, clutching her bag like a lifeline. The house was a modern marvel, sleek lines, towering windows, and marble floors that echoed wealth, but it felt cold, too big for just a man and his daughter. She'd agreed to 1 week as Emma's caregiver against every instinct screaming at her to run. But the memory of Emma's smile, fragile and fleeting, had cracked something open inside her. 1 week, she told herself, just one. James led her to Emma's room, a soft space filled with pastel walls and shelves of untouched toys. Emma sat in her wheelchair, her gaze fixed on nothing, her small hands folded in her lap. "She's been quieter lately," James said, rubbing the back of his neck. His voice carried a weight Sarah recognized. Guilt, the kind that came from loving someone you couldn't reach. Sarah nodded, setting her bag down. "Let's start simple," she said, pulling out a picture book and a small sketch pad. She knelt beside Emma, her voice gentle. "Hey, Emma, want to read with me?" No response, but Sarah didn't push. She opened the book, reading aloud about a curious rabbit, her tone warm and steady. Emma's fingers twitched, just slightly, and Sarah's heart skipped. It was small, but it was something. Over the next 2 days, Sarah tried different activities: reading, playing soft music, guiding Emma's hand to touch textured toys. Emma resisted at first, flinching or turning away, and doubt crept into Sarah's mind. What if she was wrong? What if she couldn't do this anymore? But on the 3rd day, she brought out the sketch pad. "Let's draw something," she said, placing a crayon in Emma's hand. She guided Emma's fingers, tracing a wobbly circle. "Look, a sun," Sarah said, smiling. Emma's eyes flicked to the paper and slowly, shakily, she pressed the crayon down, adding a jagged yellow line. A sun, imperfect but hers. Sarah's breath caught, tears pricking her eyes. She thought of Sophie, who'd loved drawing despite her trembling hands, her pictures always bright with color. "You did it, Emma," Sarah whispered, her voice breaking. Emma didn't smile, but her fingers lingered on the crayon, and that was enough. James, who'd been watching from the doorway, stepped inside. "She drew that?" he asked, his voice thick with disbelief. Sarah nodded, wiping her eyes. "She's in there, James. She's listening." He sat beside Emma, his usual guarded demeanor softening. "Good job, sweetheart," he said, his hand hovering over hers before gently squeezing it. Sarah saw the flicker of hope in his eyes, the same hope she felt, but was too scared to name. That evening, James joined them for a reading session, his presence tentative at first. He listened as Sarah read, then surprised her by speaking. "My wife, Laura, used to read to Emma," he said, his voice low. "She was an artist, painted these big, colorful murals. I thought I could, fill that space for Emma. But I can't." Sarah looked at him, seeing the cracks in his polished exterior. "You're not supposed to replace her," she said softly. "You're her dad." "That's enough." James's jaw tightened, but he nodded, his gaze on Emma. "I haven't been very good at it." "You're here now," Sarah said, and for the first time, she saw him not as a wealthy businessman, but as a father carrying the same kind of grief she knew too well. The next day, they took Emma to a nearby park, hoping fresh air might help. Sarah pushed Emma's wheelchair along a paved path, pointing out birds and flowers while James walked beside them. For a moment, it felt almost normal. 3 people finding their way together. But then a voice cut through the calm. "James Thompson? Didn't expect to see you here." A man in a tailored suit approached, a smirk on his face. He glanced at Emma, his expression shifting to disdain. "Still dragging that burden around, huh?" James froze, his hands clenching into fists. Sarah's stomach churned, but before she could speak, James stepped forward, his voice low and dangerous. "She's my daughter, not a burden. Say that again and you'll regret it." The man scoffed but backed off, muttering under his breath. James turned to Emma, his face flushed with anger and shame. "I'm sorry, sweetheart," he whispered, kneeling beside her. Emma didn't react, but Sarah saw the pain in James's eyes, the kind that came from realizing the world could be cruel to someone you loved. Back at the house, Sarah sat with Emma that night, smoothing her blanket as she settled her for bed. Emma's eyes were half closed, her breathing slow. On impulse, Sarah began to sing, her voice barely above a whisper. "Hush, little baby, don't say a word." It was the lullaby she'd sung to Sophie, the one she'd sworn she'd never sing again. Her throat tightened, memories of her sister flooding back. Sophie's crooked smile, her stubborn spirit. But as she sang, Emma stirred, her fingers curling around the blanket, and Sarah kept going, tears streaming down her face. "Mama's gonna buy you a mockingbird." Outside the room, James stood frozen in the hallway, the soft melody stopping him in his tracks. He'd been passing by, checking on Emma as he always did, expecting silence or restlessness. But now he saw his daughter sleeping peacefully, her face relaxed in a way he hadn't seen since Laura died. And Sarah, with her voice trembling and her cheeks wet, was the reason. He gripped the doorframe, his chest tight. This wasn't just about Emma anymore. Sarah was reaching him too, pulling him out of the numbness he'd lived in for so long. He thought of the man at the park, the cruelty in his words, and the way Sarah had looked at Emma, not with pity but with belief. She wasn't just helping his daughter. She was showing him how to fight for her, how to be the father Emma deserved. James swallowed hard, the realization settling deep. Sarah was changing them both, and he wasn't sure he could let her go when the week was over. The week with Sarah was transforming James's home, filling it with small miracles. Emma's wobbly drawings, her fleeting glances of recognition, the soft hum of Sarah's lullabies. James found himself lingering longer each day, drawn not just to his daughter's progress but to Sarah herself. Her quiet strength, her unguarded moments of vulnerability, stirred something in him he'd buried since Laura's death. He told himself he was just grateful, but the truth was harder to ignore. One evening, after Emma was asleep, James and Sarah sat on the back patio, the air cool and thick with the scent of pine. Stars speckled the Asheville sky, and Sarah sipped tea, her hands wrapped around the mug for warmth. James watched her, the way her eyes softened when she spoke of Emma, the way she carried her pain like a shadow she couldn't shake. "You're good at this," James said, breaking the silence. "Not just with Emma, but making things feel right." Sarah's lips curved, but her smile was tinged with sadness. "It doesn't always feel right. Sometimes I think I'm just pretending I know what I'm doing." James leaned forward, his voice low. "You're not pretending. I see it, Sarah. Emma sees it. You're giving her something I never could." She looked at him, her hazel eyes searching his. "And what about you, James? What do you need?" The question caught him off guard, raw and direct. He thought of Laura, of the years he'd spent building walls to keep the pain at bay. "I don't know," he admitted, his voice rough. "I've been so afraid of losing her, of losing anyone, that I stopped trying to feel anything at all." Sarah's expression softened and she set her mug down. "I know that fear," she said quietly. "After Sophie died, I told myself I'd never let anyone in again. It hurts too much when they're gone." James's chest tightened. He saw himself in her words, the same scars, the same dread. Without thinking, he reached for her hand, his fingers brushing hers. She didn't pull away. "You're not alone in that," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But you make me want to try." Sarah's breath hitched, and for a moment they just sat there, hands touching, the weight of their shared pain hanging between them. Then, slowly, James leaned in, and Sarah met him halfway. Their lips touched, soft and tentative, a kiss that felt like a question and an answer all at once. It was warm, steady, like a promise neither was ready to name. But as quickly as it began, Sarah pulled back, her eyes wide with panic. "I can't," she whispered, standing abruptly, her chair scraping against the patio. "I can't do this." James stood too, confusion knotting his brow. "Sarah, what's wrong?" She shook her head, wrapping her arms around herself. Us, Emma, it's too much. I can't lose someone else. I won't survive it." Her voice cracked, and she turned, fleeing inside before James could stop her. The next morning, Sarah was waiting in James's office, her bag packed, her face pale but resolute. "I'm done," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "I can't work here anymore." James's heart sank, but he kept his voice calm. "Sarah, talk to me. Last night was a mistake," she cut in, her words sharp. "You don't need me, James. You're just looking for someone to fill the hole your wife left. I'm not her. I'm not anyone's fix." Her words hit like a slap, and James flinched. "That's not true," he said, stepping closer. "You're not a replacement. You're part of us." Sarah's eyes glistened, but she shook her head. "I can't be. I'm sorry." She turned and walked out, leaving James staring at the empty doorway, his world unraveling. The days that followed were a nightmare. Emma stopped drawing, her sketchpad abandoned on the table. She refused to eat, pushing away spoons with a force that broke James's heart. He tried everything, reading her favorite stories, playing the games Sarah had taught them, but Emma's eyes were vacant, her small body curled in on itself. James sat with her each night, whispering apologies, but he knew he wasn't enough. Sarah hadn't just been a caregiver, she'd been family, and her absence left a void he couldn't fill. Then came the call from a mutual acquaintance, a diner regular who'd seen Sarah around. "Heard she got evicted," the man said casually, as if it were gossip, not a gut punch. "Couldn't pay rent, I guess. Tough break for someone like her." James's stomach churned. Evicted? Sarah, who'd poured her heart into Emma, who'd worked nights to pay off her sister's medical bills, was now homeless, because the world didn't care enough to give her a chance. He thought of the customers who'd mocked her, the society that saw her as just a waitress, and the unfairness of it burned. He'd been part of that world too, assuming money could solve everything, but it hadn't saved Emma's smile, and it wouldn't save Sarah now. He sat in Emma's room that night, watching her sleep, her face pale and drawn. The yellow sun she'd drawn with Sarah hung on the wall, a reminder of what they'd lost. James's throat tightened as he realized the truth. Sarah hadn't just walked away from him or Emma, she'd run from her own heart, terrified of breaking again, and he'd let her go without a fight. But as he looked at his daughter, her small hand clutching the blanket, he knew he couldn't let this be the end. Not for Emma, not for Sarah, and not for the family they'd started to become. James couldn't watch Emma fade any longer. Her silence had returned, heavier now, her small body curled in her wheelchair, her sketchpad untouched. The yellow sun on her wall mocked him, a reminder of the light Sarah had brought and taken away. He'd built an empire on logic, on control, but no amount of wealth could fix this. Sarah was gone, and with her, the family he hadn't realized he'd needed. But he wasn't the man who gave up. Not anymore. He found himself driving to the corner kitchen, Emma in the back, her face pale and drawn. The diner was busy, the clatter of plates and chatter filling the air, but James's focus was singular. Sarah was behind the counter, scribbling on a notepad, her hair messily tied back, her eyes tired but sharp. When she saw James and Emma, she froze, her pen stilling mid-word. "Sarah," James said, his voice cutting through the noise as he pushed Emma's wheelchair forward. "We need to talk." Sarah's gaze dropped to Emma, and her breath caught, her expression crumbling. "I'm working," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Please," James said, softer now, his eyes pleading. "For her?" Sarah hesitated, then set her notepad down, motioning them to a quiet corner. She knelt beside Emma, her hands trembling as she touched the girl's blanket. "Hey, sweetheart," she whispered, her voice thick. Emma's eyes flicked to her, dull but searching, and Sarah's lips quivered. James took a breath, his heart pounding. "I let you walk away once, and it was a mistake," he said, his voice raw. "Emma's not eating, not drawing, not anything. She needs you, Sarah, and I—" He paused, swallowing hard. "I need you. Not just for her, but for me." Sarah's eyes widened and she stood, crossing her arms like a shield. "James, you don't know what you're saying. I'm not the answer to your problems." "You're not a fix," he said fiercely. "You're the one who showed me I could be a father again, who made Emma smile, who made me feel something after years of nothing. You're not just a waitress or a caregiver. You're us." Sarah's breath hitched and she looked away, tears glistening. "You don't understand," she said, her voice breaking. "I failed, Sophie. I promised I'd save her, and I didn't. Every time I look at Emma, I see her, and I'm terrified I'll fail again." James stepped closer, his voice gentle but firm. "You didn't fail, Sophie. You loved her with everything you had. And Emma? She's not Sophie. She's proof you're still meant for this, that you can make a difference. Sarah wiped her eyes, her shoulders shaking. Emma, she's the first person who made me feel like I could be good again, she admitted, her voice barely audible. Like I could matter. You do matter, James said, his throat tight. To her, to me. Silence hung between them, heavy with possibility. Sarah looked at Emma, who reached out a trembling hand, touching Sarah's sleeve. That small gesture broke something in Sarah, and she knelt again, pulling Emma into a gentle hug. Okay, she whispered. I'll come back, but only until she's stable. After that I have to go. I need to finish what I started. For Sophie, for kids like Emma. James's heart sank at the thought of her leaving, but he nodded. What do you mean? Sarah stood, her voice steadier now. There are kids in Asheville, kids like Emma, who don't have anyone, no therapists, no programs, because their families can't afford it. I want to build something, a center, a place where they're seen, not pitied. I owe it to Sophie. James stared at her, awe mixing with his ache. He thought of the man at the park, the customers who'd mocked Sarah, the world that overlooked people like her and Emma. I'll help, he said without hesitation. Whatever you need, money, resources, I'm in. Sarah's eyes softened, but she shook her head. This isn't about your money, James. It's about showing up. He nodded, understanding. Then I'll show up. Back at the house, Sarah resumed her work with Emma, her presence like a balm. One afternoon, as they sat together, Emma picked up a crayon, her movements slow but deliberate. Sarah guided her hand, and together they drew a bright sun, a green hill, and 3 stick figures holding hands. That's us, Sarah said, her voice trembling. You, me, and your dad. James, watching from the doorway, felt tears sting his eyes. The drawing was simple, but it was everything. A family, fragile but real. Sarah looked up, her own eyes wet, and for the first time, James saw not just fear in her, but hope. They were healing, all 3 of them, and though Sarah's time with them was temporary, this moment, their moment, was eternal. Sarah's return brought Emma back to life. Each day, the little girl grew steadier, her trembling hands gripping crayons with new purpose. Sarah taught her to trace bold lines, and soon Emma was drawing on her own, a vibrant meadow, a soaring bird, a radiant sun. One afternoon, she handed Sarah a large sheet of paper, her eyes bright. It was a painting of a golden field with a single figure in the center, arms outstretched. For you, Sarah whispered, her voice choking as she hugged Emma tightly, tears falling. It was a gift, a piece of Emma's heart, and Sarah knew she'd carry it forever. James watched, his chest aching with gratitude and loss. Sarah had warned him her time was short, but seeing Emma's progress made her departure feel unbearable. Yet he saw the fire in Sarah's eyes, the purpose she'd rediscovered. Inspired, he organized a small art show at the corner kitchen, displaying Emma's drawings. The community gathered, marveling at the colorful works of a girl they'd never truly seen before. Whispers of awe filled the diner, and James felt a swell of pride, not just for Emma, but for Sarah, who'd unlocked this miracle. The night before Sarah's departure, she sat with Emma, their hands clasped. I'm going to school again, she said softly, to help kids like you. I'll name the place after my sister Sophie. But I'll never forget you, Emma. You're my sunshine. Emma's fingers tightened and she leaned into Sarah, a silent promise. James stood nearby, his throat tight, knowing this goodbye was as much for him as for his daughter. Sarah's choice wasn't easy. Leaving Asheville meant leaving Emma and James, the family she'd found in the unlikeliest of places. But she knew staying would mean abandoning her dream, a center for kids with disabilities, a haven where they'd be valued, not pitied. As she boarded the bus, Emma's painting tucked in her bag, she whispered, "This is for you, Sophie." James didn't let Sarah's vision fade. Inspired by her courage, he founded a charity funding programs for disabled children across Asheville. He named it Sophie's Light, a tribute to the woman who'd changed them. Emma, now painting daily, filled their home with color, her laughter a sound James cherished. They wrote to Sarah, sharing drawings and updates. her letters a lifeline that kept their bond alive. Love, James realized, wasn't just about holding on. It was about giving each other the strength to grow, to change the world. Sarah hadn't stayed, but she'd left a legacy. In Emma's art, in James's purpose, in every child her center would lift. As he hung Emma's latest painting, a son with 3 figures, he knew they'd carry Sarah with them always. I believe Sarah's choice to leave for a greater purpose shows that love sometimes means letting go, not clinging to what feels safe. Her sacrifice for kids like Emma challenges us to rethink what family means. Maybe it's not just about staying, but about empowering others to shine. Some might argue she should have stayed, that Emma and James needed her more. What do you think? Can love truly thrive through distance, or does it demand presence? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Share your perspective whether you agree or not. A huge thank you for watching this heartfelt story. If it moved you, hit that like button, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe for more tales of resilience and connection. Let's keep spreading love and sparking conversations together.